In a previous video, I had talked about how because most of the wealth in the United States, especially when it comes to corporate wealth, is in the hands of very few people. We don't have a free economy where you see like most people have their own business, as they say. Now, if you go to places like, for example, if you've been to Colombia, if you've been to Mexico, and many of these other Hispanic countries, or maybe many Eastern countries, you'll typically see people selling stuff on the street, small little mom and pops selling coffee, cakes, cookies, etc., or little gadgets that they sell on the street. You really don't see that. I mean, I see this here in Manhattan. You'll typically see people like selling fruit, the fruit stands here in Manhattan. Some people might sell maybe like hats, straw hats, etc., but you don't really see the personal individualized business. You don't really see the individual creating the economy. Much of the economy in America is created for them. And so this is why I say, because most of the businesses, I said in my last video where I had talked about, in terms of food and beverage, the food and beverage business, the economy for food and beverage is only controlled by 10 corporations. So it is not difficult to create inflation. And so this is what many articles that came out in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, where the narrative of inflation was allowing businesses to artificially raise prices. And so in an article from CBS, it said some of the nation's largest retailers have been using soaring inflation rates as an excuse to raise prices and rake in billions of additional dollars in additional profit, as corporate watchdog group charged Friday. Companies such as CVS, Kroger, TJ Maxx, other companies, for example, like Walmart, have been using the opportunity because of the narrative of inflation that the government put out there. And this was because I had said, I think back in 2020, in terms of the debt, the government has always, when they couldn't afford the interest rates, have increased inflation to inflate the debt away. And so this is what you saw. This was the purpose of collapsing the supply chain, keeping people at home, the narrative of we need to shut everything down, we need to shut down economies. And so what you end up with is you end up with inflation. And of course, the government pumps out all of this money, puts it into the hands of the people. You don't have to pay your rent. You don't have to pay your student loans. You don't have to pay your cell phone. You don't have to pay your gas and electric, and they can't kick you out. And so people were going out there spending. And so naturally you get this huge spike in inflation. And so over time, of course, that goes away. We saw that, for example, looking at, if you look at the BDI index, which is an index, it's called the Baltic Dry Index, and it is basically an index that monitors the price of what it costs to ship goods. And so as you can see, we saw a huge spike, and some people will show you this and they'll show it to you like this, right? Of the narrative of, oh, shipping is collapsing. Look at the rates at which people are shipping is collapsing. Nobody's buying anything. And it's like, well, if you take a broader picture of the index is basically right where we've been. It's actually still elevated, showing that the price of shipping is still elevated from where it had been for the better part of 10 years. As you can see, this is from 2020, and of course during the time period of the pandemic, where the United States government forced many other countries under the guise of a pandemic to shut down. And of course this is naturally going to cause shipping rates to increase as the wheels start to come back online. And so you see this huge spike in prices. And so some people might show you this index and for the purpose of telling you the sky is falling, the economy is collapsing, and they'll only show you part of the index. And so you'll look at it and it'll look like this, and you're like, whoa, it's collapsing. It's completely collapsing. You probably can't see it because my face is in the way. So let's go ahead and move myself out the way. And so this is what they'll show you. They're like, look, the index is completely collapsing. But if you actually look at the broad index, we're basically right back up where it was. And so this is why I said that because you have businesses in the hands of very few people, the stock market and the economy itself is very easily manipulated for a short period of time. And this is why I said, if people were really worried about inflation, then they would produce more. If you're really worried about inflation, then you would buy less and produce more, because that will help lower prices. Because as you start to increase supply, then it will help to meet demand. But now you see all of these stores saying, "Oh, we're going to close down." Well, what is that going to do to price? It's going to keep prices higher. We're going to shut down all these supermarkets. Kroger is doing this, and so is Aldi's. And they're like, "Oh, we're going to cut down." I think it was like a couple of hundred stores that they're going to close down, several hundred stores that they're going to close down. And it's because they're like, "Oh, we're waiting for the government to say that we can merge because we can't compete with Amazon." But I just showed you that according to many of these watchdogs, that they're saying you're artificially keeping these prices kind of high. And there have been numerous reports where people will go to one store and they'll, like, the sales at Kroger's are higher than the regular prices at another store. And it's because they're artificially keeping prices high. And so when they shut down stores, what does that do? It lowers the amount of availability. And so that keeps prices naturally higher. It's just for the same reason, in New York, why they don't build houses and why they let many of these apartments, they don't allow, the city doesn't allow the owners to fix them, because it artificially keeps prices higher. And so there are certain people who understand this, but they'll tailor the information to promote fear, and it promotes misinformation. And one person that I'm going to point out, and this is by no means as to call out this specific individual, because I notice this with many preppers, many people who are preppers, or these people who push financial freedom, or they claim to be like a financial individual, but a lot of the information that they give is misinformation. And so we'll take a look at a video. We'll take a look at a video here this is John Williams. This is his video, YouTube, and the title of this video is "Retirees Are Now Forced to Sell 30 Million U.S. Homes." Now, mind you, the biggest consumer currently of homes right now that are buying homes are baby boomers. Baby boomers are the biggest cash buyers of homes currently. And of course, there's going to be a little bit of a narrative. And of course, this is for the purpose he runs like what do they call it? Like a fix your credit sort of thing. And so all of his videos are just basically infomercials for his credit business. And so every single one of his videos, he says, everything is going to collapse and get ready for the biggest transfer of wealth and fix your credit so you can take advantage of it. And it's like, well, if you're going to have this big collapse, then it just doesn't make sense. But it's for the purpose of pushing for his business.
Hey, what's up, guys? John here. Millions of Americans are now selling off their stocks.
Growing cohort of billionaires and CEOs are unloading stock, and at an increasing pace.
America's top billionaires selling over $9 billion worth of stock just this year.
They are selling off their 401ks.
More Americans are dipping into their 401k retirement funds right now.
Now, in terms of more Americans dipping into their 401ks, yes, you have more Americans that are retiring. We have the biggest retiree generation in all history. This is not something that is limited to America. This is a global problem because of the narrative of there's too many people, so people weren't having children, especially in Western countries. And so this is information that they don't tell you about. They don't sit here and tell you that, oh yeah, by the way, we also have on record the most amount of people retiring. And so naturally, you're going to have record numbers of people dipping into their 401ks. Via retirement or for other reasons. We're going to talk about this, which is talked about in the video.
Now to help pay their everyday bills.
Growing number of Americans are dipping into their retirement fund nest eggs to help pay bills.
Retirees are panicking, looking at this future, realizing that their entire lives they anticipated for a 2 to 3% inflation rate, and they're looking around at their insurance bills on their homes, their cars. They're looking at property taxes. They are looking at all their costs saying, what am I going to do? Well, many people are now predicting we're going to see tens of millions of homes listed for sale from retirees due to elevated mortgage rates. They cannot afford to borrow against their properties. They don't qualify. They can't make the payments. They're going to be forced to sell in 2020.
And this narrative of retirees and baby boomers are going to be forced to sell. It's important to understand that most of these individuals bought their homes at very cheap prices by comparison to today. I've been house shopping for the past couple of years, and I've seen prices. For example, I have been looking in Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Kentucky, etc. And you see, for example, homes that were in 2019, 18 for years had been 150,000. Then you'll see those homes spike to 250,000, 275,000. Maybe they were listed at one point for 300,000. I've seen a lot of this. And then they come down from that price of 300,000 at the top, they come down to 250. And people will sit here and be like, "Oh my God, house prices are collapsing. They're down 10%, 15%." And it's like, yeah, but they're still inflated 100% from where they were back in 2017, 18, and 19. And these are important facts that you have to take a broader picture of what is going on. And so most baby boomers own their home outright. They're not paying mortgages, or their mortgage is so low because they were financed at a very low interest rate if they bought them within the last 10 years. And so this is not the case that many baby boomers are going to go out there and be selling their homes. This is just a narrative, and I've said before that there's a lot of narratives, and if you understand the narrative and you push the narrative, well, you're going to get pushed in the algorithm, especially when it comes to fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
2024 and 2025. So if you're a renter and you're thinking about buying real estate, you might want to hold off just for a little bit. I think you're going to see a lot of new inventory hit the market, and supply and demand are going to dictate price. As more inventory hits the market, more sellers will be competing over a smaller pool of buyers that can afford to buy. Big opportunity is going to be coming in the next year or so in the real estate market. I'm going to break it down for you. I'm going to show you the facts to help you and position you for what I think is going to be the greatest wealth transfer in American history. Please hit the like button. When you hit the like button, YouTube will share this content to educate other people about what's really going on. And if you'd like to fix your credit, we'd love to help.
And this
saving strength.
This is basically his pump for his credit business. And like I said, these are all just infomercials. So I want you to pay attention to some of the numbers that are talked about in this video. We're going to cover it really quickly, right? So more Americans are, as the article says, yanking money from their 401k. We're going to see what those numbers are.
401k plans to pay the bills. This came out yesterday, right? So they go on to say that as this era, savings shrink, more and more consumers are turning to a costlier way to borrow, credit cards. Despite a record high rate, credit card balances have swelled $148 billion over the past year to $1 trillion, $80 billion, according to the Fed. The same.
Now, it's also important to understand that if the economy was bad, you would not see credit card companies willing to lend. Because if the perception was that more people were going to lose their jobs, if the reality was that more people were going to lose their jobs, if the reality was that they weren't going to get paid, and that these people were just going to end up having to file bankruptcy because of an impending collapse, then why would they be lending them money via a credit card? They wouldn't. And what you're seeing is record credit card spending. And I've said this before. If people were worried about the future, they would be saving money. Instead, they're spending all of their money and more on with credit cards, showing that the economy is expanding. The amount of credit within the economy for people to utilize via a credit card is expanding. That's exactly what he said. By comparison, right? According to a report from New York Federal Reserve, this was released on Wednesday, that credit cards, despite record high rates, credit card balances are expanding. So the amount of available credit card of credit is expanding, meaning the economy is growing, not contracting.
Same report also found the share of households newly delinquent on credit cards at the highest level in 12 years. Others are leaning on other retirement accounts for cash. Bank of America said the number of 401k participants taking hardship distributions increased 27% from the first quarter of the year. The average household amount pulling out was $5,070.
$5,070 is absolutely nothing. It's important to understand that if people are pulling money out of their 401ks, then that money is going into the economy. And so what is that going to do to the economy? If the purpose of the 401k came at a time period, 401ks were introduced into America in 1978. And in 1970s is where America had this record high inflation. So they created 401ks to push inflation into the future. So, and of course, where did it go? it went into the stock market. And so the people who understood this, and this is why I said that the stock market is a Ponzi scheme, because they pushed people into the stock market because they created too much currency. And at that time, this is also where like businesses offering healthcare, because the government put a cap on wages. So they had to attract employees somehow, because the government was paying a lot of, at that time, governments were hiring a lot of people. And so how were businesses able to compete with governments? And especially when the government says that you can't keep raising wages under the narrative of wage price spiral. And so what they did was they put a cap. And so they started offering sick days, 401ks, benefits, etc. Right? And so that change in the amount of what you would be paid, right? Your total package is your days off, your healthcare benefits, etc., has a monetary value. And so they couldn't give you that value in cash because the government didn't allow them. So they created 401ks. And so that pushed all of that money that would have gone into consumption and kept inflation higher. It drove that inflation into the stock market, and the government understood what they were doing. And if you understood what the government was doing at that time, then you bought in ahead of all these people. So if you were very wealthy and you understood for the next 20, 30, 40 or more years that these people were going to slowly keep on dripping money into the stock market via a 401k that was controlled overwhelmingly by government entities, well, that was an easy way to get rich. All you had to do was just buy these big companies. They control which companies go into the S&P, etc., and then just buy that and then just ride the wave. And that's what most of these people do. And so the lying with statistics that this article does, where it talks about how there's an increase from quarter over quarter, and we'll see what the number was in terms of how many people were pulling money out of their 401ks.
Bank of America Client Employee Benefit Program are comprised of more than 4 million plan participants. The bank found that 0.59% of 401k participants took a hardship distribution last quarter, up from 0.52% in the second quarter and 0.49% the year before, according to the IRS.
And so that's the big boom. That's the big boom of the article. If you remember, the beginning of the article was talking about, record number of people. What was it called? More Americans are yanking money out of their 401ks. And what was the big difference from year to year? 0.49. And it went up to 0.59. A whole 0.1% increase of people pulling money out of their 401ks for hardship. And so this is how you lie with statistics. And of course, this is how you lie with headlines. And so if you understand this, this is how you can create a narrative of fear that just doesn't exist. And so we'll go back. We'll cover one more point in this particular video.
Rising inflation. 61% of Americans who paid a bill late in the past 6 months say they couldn't afford it. 61% of Americans could not afford it. For context,
did you hear how he changed what the actual wording of the article said? We're going to go back and listen to what the title of the article is again.
Amid rising inflation, 61% of Americans who paid a bill late in the past 6 months say they couldn't afford it. 61% of Americans could not.
You see, the article said 61% of people who paid a bill late paid it because they couldn't afford it. And then he twisted what the wording of the article and said that it was 61% of Americans. And that's not what the article was saying.
Not afford it. For context, there's 205 million Americans over the age of 18 years old, right? So you're looking at maybe 120 million, 130 million Americans that paid a bill late the last 6 months, right?
And again, this is not true. And so I see a lot of people that are doing this, they're creating this narrative of economic fear, and it just doesn't exist. It's not what the article said. The article did not say that 61% of Americans paid a bill late. It said of the people who did pay a bill late, 61% of those people said that they couldn't afford to pay the bill because of monetary issues. And then he went and said 160 some odd million Americans paid a bill late within the last 6 months. And that's just not true. But you have to But this sort of information, it's very catching to the ear, and it creates the narrative of fear. It creates the narrative of inflation. It creates this narrative that of impending doom. And of course, this is very popular. And this is why I said this stuff like this gets pushed very heavily into the algorithms, and a lot of people are pushing fear that just doesn't exist. The reality is that we're going to be moving into an economic boom. America would not be pulling in all of these immigrants to then come into a collapse. Why would they? It doesn't make any sense. Why would they bring in millions of migrants over the past couple of years during the pandemic if the reality was we were going into a collapse? People are a resource. And so I said this before in many videos, that this allows the government to help keep inflation low in the country, help bring wages down so that the businesses in the country can operate at a lesser of expense. This will help bring prices down. And people are a resource. And you can borrow more debt per person. So what this does is it lowers the per capita debt, the ratio of debt to people in your country. And so this is why governments can create more currency, because there's more people in the country that are now able to consume. There's more need for housing. How is housing going to collapse? They just brought in millions of people. How is housing going to collapse? All these migrants need homes. All these migrants need jobs. All these migrants need healthcare. All these migrants need food, clothing, etc. They're going to have kids. So how are you going to experience a collapse when more people are coming into the country? And this is going to allow the American government to create more consumption, which will then stimulate production abroad. Anyway, this video is really long. I'm going to leave it here. Leave your comment below, and I will check you next time.